Right. So May was a bit of a mess, really. I mean, it started off with some good things. So we have here, this was right at the end of April, and this was a prescient segment. We talked about the truth behind the Dutch protocol, which, for those who don't know, is the number one study that was funded by the manufacturer of puberty blocker triptorelin, which is what they used in the Netherlands and also in the infamous Tavistock clinic, that said that, okay, if you put children on early intervention puberty blockers, it lowers their suicidality and ameliorates their gender dysphoria. Bear in mind, one of the participants died during the study, and they struck that from the records, and they didn't disclose that the drug manufacturer funded the study. So the reason I raised this is was ahead of Norway in the month of May, and following Sweden and Finland abandoning the protocol and saying we're going to go with explorative therapy instead, non-affirmative therapy. France then issued some prohibitive guidelines. They said that we're worried about this and we're going to explore it. They didn't quite make a formal policy rollback, but they were skeptical about the use of this protocol in the future. And then later on in June, as I'm sure you're probably going to mention, NHS England turned around and said we're no longer going to prescribe puberty blockers as the first port of call, especially after the Tavistock closed. Now, at time of recording, Tavistock has got a stay of execution till spring 2024, and the Telegraph were reporting the other day that in the last year, 100 children have still been prescribed puberty blockers by Tavistock and the NHS. So for some reason, it doesn't show any sign of stopping, but at least in guidance in various European countries, bit of a shift. Not too bad.
Hi folks, sorry to interrupt the video, but I just wanted to announce that we have a new line of merch in our merch store. The merch store was kind of empty for a while, and so I thought, right, okay, what do I actually want on shirts? And so I just went through some of the most epic and true things that I think that historical people have said, and John managed to make an amazing set of merch out of it. And we will have extra things coming in the store, such as posters for these to go on. Thanks for everything, folks. Now back to the video.
Right. So, right at the start of the month, First Republic Bank collapsed. Now, this was the fourth financial institution to collapse as of last year. This was after Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and Silvergate. 3 of the 4 largest US bank collapses happened in 2023, and no one seems to have batted an eye. And part of the reason was that the US government allowed JP Morgan Chase to snap up First Republic practically overnight. And it's almost like they were monitoring the situation, knew it was going to collapse. It would have been illegal for JP Morgan to have purchased the bank when it was still on its last legs, because it would have gone over the post-2008 financial crash rulings that said a bank can only get to a certain size. But once it collapsed, the government approved and encouraged them to buy the bank up. So they're centralizing the 2 big-to-fail banks that are aligned with the Fed. Very suspicious. This is obviously due to a lot of the bank runs that have come as a result of the mass money printing during COVID, because people have turned around and gone, right, you've inflated the currency and debased the currency to such an extent that why should I keep all my savings in a bank account? I'm not getting interest on it. I'll stick it in a money market. And so all the rich people were losing confidence in banks and just buggering off. So
they were really old-fashioned bank runs. Dan did a really good job of explaining how it was working on the Silicon Valley Bank, where it was everybody's second best friend running to the bank, because everybody who had their best friend tell them problems were happening just immediately withdrew their money from their banking apps. A lot of the people ended up having to line up outside because of the fact that, oh crap, I've only just found out and now the banks are stopping me from withdrawing my entire cash deposit.
Yeah, it was like a scene from It's a Wonderful Life. Dan was also in this episode, and he did a really good job of explaining the reasons why, so go and check that out.
I know it's not entirely relevant to this, but it's kind of tangential. I think SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, I think at the beginning of November, he's just been sentenced to potentially a few years in prison for defrauding people or whatever it was that he was charged with. So that's quite interesting. The finance hasn't been going great this year.
No. It's almost like it's connected to government policy for some reason, but that might just be a conspiracy theory. Speaking of terrible government policy and conspiracy theories, a load of the Epstein clients got revealed via his calendar in an exclusive article by the Wall Street Journal. This was, I think, at the time of recording, about the 5th most popular segment we have on YouTube. So the algorithm picked this one up, and we didn't get assassinated for that, unlike Jeffrey Epstein. Some of the clients included not very notable figures, such as Bill Gates, the current CIA director William Burns, Bill Clinton counsel and Obama attorney general nominee, and Goldman Sachs lawyer Catherine Romola, Noam Chomsky, upstanding ethicist, Adrian D. Rothschild. That's not me making conspiracy theory. I didn't make it up. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and Woody Allen.
If you were trying to get a list of important people to blackmail, and to peddle influence, that would be a very good selection of people, wouldn't it?
It's almost like the CIA director should have known ahead of time that he might be in a compromising position flying on the Lolita Express.
I mean, look at the name for a start.
Yes. I mean, it's almost like he could have run a background check on this guy because he did it after Epstein was already a convicted sex offender. Good job, Ghislaine Maxwell trafficked children to absolutely no one, isn't it? Anyway, on with more sordid stuff. Vice went bankrupt. This is something that you covered with me, with their entire butt plug section at the time, which I'll still never let you
I
know.
only included that just to torture Connor, because me and Stelios, we are the people who delight in making our colleagues suffer, and so I did that for Connor's sake only, really.
Yeah, cheers for that, mate.
You're
Really
welcome.
appreciate it. So this year, BuzzFeed, Vice, and Jezebel have all gone under. Vice did get bailed out because George Soros and Fortress Investment Group snapped them up for $400 million, which is 6 years ago, down from their prior valuation of $5.7 billion, because they spaffed it all the way on intersectional feminism rather than edgy documentaries like they used to make.
In fact, even recently, Vice have been letting more employees go. So, good news all round on that front.
Yeah, it's just fun to see the enemy hemorrhaging morale. Though our side have been hemorrhaging because, of course, as you alluded to in your last segment, Tucker was fired in April. In May, we got a bunch of very strange reasons about it. So some of the various reasons included people thinking it was related to the Dominion lawsuit, because a lot of the discovery process unveiled some of the behind-the-scenes conversations, and Tucker was at odds with the mandated programming at the time. He was questioning some of the narratives about election interference, and he was more saying that Sidney Powell didn't seem particularly credible, but he was forced to have her on his show. Also, there was a bit of a personal angle with it. There was an article that ran inside information that he had dinner with Rupert Murdoch and his latest fiancée, and his fiancée believed that Tucker was basically the second coming of Christ, and Rupert Murdoch got a bit jealous and binned her off and then sacked Tucker, which is quite interesting.
I also heard that it was because I think right before he got fired, he'd made a speech at some conference where he spoke about how Christianity was very important for the future of American culture.
Yep.
Murdoch is apparently very anti-Christian and uncomfortable with people making overtly religious statements. So that may have had something else to do with
I did play the clips in there. I think it was Heritage. Someone can correct me on that, but it was a fantastic speech. It was also quite interesting. Some people pointed that BlackRock had started snapping up more shares in Fox Corp over the last few years, so they had some more say over the board. And
Was
then
this also around the time that those text messages got leaked, where he had said that you shouldn't.
White men don't fight like that.
White men don't fight like that, because he'd seen some clips of white guys ganging up to beat up some guy.
One Antifa kid, yeah. And he said, I actually felt sorry for the kid because this is someone's son, brother. Someone loves this guy and he's fallen down a rabbit hole and he shouldn't have the absolute hell beat out of him. And Tucker was saying, this was a moment of self-reflection for me because even though he's on the other side, I didn't want to see him get absolutely trounced for his false beliefs. And that was a moment of humility, and the New York Times tried to run that as, look at Eva Tucker Carlson observing group-based patterns. It's like, okay, all right, whatever.
That makes him look better, not worse, doesn't it? Sure.
Yes, but we're sane people. And then what also made him look better was in this, Media Matters decided to leak a bunch of bird footage, so pre-filming footage of Tucker getting annoyed at the Tate brothers being unprofessional and making jokes at sex at Piers Morgan and saying F you to Media Matters. And we're just like, yeah, this makes him look hilarious. Makes him look really personable. Like, was this meant to make him look bad?
I think my biggest takeaway from all this is that Tucker is an aficionado of world star hip hop.
He and Stelios would have the greatest live stream going over fight views.
We need to get him on here.
Yeah, I'll just phone him, I suppose.
Tucker and Stelios review Waffle House footage.
Yeah, speaking of inner city violence, this was also the month where Jordan Neely died, declaring his intent to kill someone on a train after being a drug addict, homeless person, arrested 42 times. But no, he was just a good Michael Jackson impersonator.
Also having had tried to push people onto the tracks before.
Oh, because that hasn't been happening en masse in New York recently. And yeah, so Daniel Penny, who was a former Marine, I believe, decided to subdue him along with the help of some very diverse other passengers. And Jordan Neely died during the restraint. And Daniel Penny is since currently being charged with murder by the New York state. So I hope he has fantastic representation there because, frankly, I regard him as a hero who saved his fellow passengers. But there you go.
The lesson that New York and the Democrats want you to learn from that is don't defend yourself. Don't defend yourself because we will arrest you for it.
Yeah, it's to keep the law-abiding population in perpetual fear of the arbitrary application of the law and to allow their criminal client class to have absolutely free roam because they're obsessed with race ideology. That's how you run a functioning city. Speaking of functioning city, we got that for about 1 day, and that's because the coronation happened in May. It was a little bit played down. Charles decided to diminish the ceremony a bit because he wanted to be the defender of faiths rather than the faith. You know, I say this as a Catholic. I'd rather he was just an unapologetic Anglican because that's the entire point of the country and the position that he holds. But there you go. Frustrating. This was also the time that during the coronation coverage on ITV, Adjua Ando, Martha's mum from Doctor Who, said the balcony was terribly white and got absolutely no rebuke. Loads of Ofcom complaints, but didn't suffer any career repercussions.
Funny how that works, isn't it?
Yeah, I got asked on Times Radio to talk about this, and one of her friends was the host. He's also a UN Sustainable Development Goals contributor, and they pre-recorded the interview and then edited out my criticism of her, calling her a grifter for basically wanting more blackwash roles in Bridgerton because he's friends with her. And then they cut the interview to cutting off my rebuttal when my interlocutor was just accusing me of being a white supremacist. So, very honest media there. Don't know why I expected anything else. Speaking of honest media, this is also where Ege Carrol decided to bring her lawsuit against former President Trump for a rape allegation in 1996 in a Bergdorf department store in New York, where she, in her own autobiography, admitted that there were no shop attendants and no CCTV around, which is very weird for the middle of the day for a department store. And she said that he had tried on lingerie with her and then raped her in a changing room, for which there is no DNA evidence, even though she still has the dress and claims to have frozen it and never worn it since the day it happened. And they both submitted the dress for DNA testing, and the judge said no, even though both the plaintiff and the defendant agreed to have it tested. Now, we can't allege that she's making it up because she's very litigious. She also won the case. Now, she won the case on the grounds that even though the jury found Trump not guilty of rape, he was guilty of defamation for saying she's crazy because he said that I didn't rape this woman. So he starts to pay her millions. Yeah. There's not really any words for how insane that is.
Yeah, the words are difficult to come by because I don't want to be sued. But
Yeah. Trump's being sued again because he then said this was a bogus verdict, and so she decided to sue him again. Now, this is after she has admitted that her story bears a remarkable similarity to an episode of Law and Order. Like, downright weird. And
She admitted that.
yeah,
She said it herself.
she says she's an avid Law and Order watcher, but she's somehow never seen that episode. But it is kind of funny how similar it is.
wow, that's such a strange coincidence, isn't it?
Yeah, she also
I mean,
went on
what are the odds of
CNN
that?
and said that she thinks of rape as sexy.
Wait, what?
Yep.
What?
They then cut to
There
commercial.
must be context for that.
No. So Anderson Cooper asked, "It's terrible what happened to you. What do you think about it?" And she goes, "I was not thrown on the ground and ravished. And rape is such a horrible word. I think of rape as sexy. Think of the fantasies." And then they cut to commercial. When she was asked about that on the stand, she said, "I was talking about Game of Thrones."
That doesn't make it any better.
I, for one, believe this woman.
Well,
Anyway, moving on. This was also where
Thank
Elon
God.
chose his CEO. Speaking of crazy women, this was Linda Yaccarino. She was former executive over at MSNBC, also on the World Economic Forum's wasn't it Media Trust and Safety team, something like that.
Bizarre pick.
Yeah, and she was the one that said we're going to return lawful but awful speech being suppressed, so arbitrary shadow banning. Now, at time of reporting, she hasn't been too egregious, as far as I know.
I
Elon seems to have
think
reined
a
her in.
lot of people had noticed that they seemed to be shadow banned,
Right.
but a lot of those have been lifted recently. I wouldn't be surprised if appointing somebody like this had been a demand from the ADL because they have been so aggressive with him over the past year or so. And possibly the fact that those shadow bans have been lifted and some of the statements he's made and the advertisers pulling shows that he's just decided, screw it.
Yeah, possibly
recently.
so. That's why Twitter seems to be functioning. It's not being arbitrarily strangleholded by random grievance groups that have nothing but contempt for the populations of the West. Speaking of random grievance groups, you covered this with me, actually. There was a Texas shooting, and the BBC decided to go full libel and just blame Tim Pool for it, which was mad.
Did you say I covered that?
Yes, you did. Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't remember that.
I know, news moves fast. This was the Hispanic neo-Nazi, Mauricio
yeah.
Garcia. He killed 8 and injured 7 at a mall in Allen, Texas. And this is where Bellingcat, which is the CIA-backed media research company, they found his really obscure Russian social media site on a profile on the second most popular Russian social media site that translates to classmates. And it was had random screenshots of a Timcast episode where they were discussing the Ukraine war with no captions, so it wasn't like it was endorsing it at all. And so they said he obviously inspired this guy to go and shoot a mall in Texas. And then the BBC ran an article that used Tim Pool's old photos as the thumbnail image to make it look like he was the shooter.
I'd completely
appalling.
forgotten about this whole incident, to be honest.
Yeah.
Bellingcat also ran a smear piece on us as well.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
I didn't know about
I
this.
don't remember this.
Yeah, it's. I'll have to talk about it later because it's a long story.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Tim then threatened to sue the BBC for false representation, and so they decided to change the title and the thumbnail image. Very, very interesting how suddenly you don't want to hemorrhage all that cash. It keeps you honest. One good thing did happen. Actually, I got invited to the National Conservative Conference. That was nice. We found out that we had far more friends than we ever expected within the establishment. And this upset all the right people. I mean, you did a segment on the weekend after covering the Guardian trying to say that Miriam Cates was an anti-Semite for using the phrase cultural Marxism. And it just didn't stick. I mean, she's remained a rhetorical rising star in the Conservative Party, trying to push the current containment front bench more towards our ideas. So well done, Miriam. And it was just nice to meet lots of viewers and know that actually we are annoying the right people in the right places. We had a lot more of a encouraging discourse around how to capitalize on the Conservatives' electoral defeat in the future. So not all hope is lost, maybe. Some hope is lost for some people. Not Mizzy in May. Mizzy saga was at least interesting. For anyone who doesn't remember, we became aware of Mizzy because he broke into someone's home on TikTok. And then we started seeing the rest of his TikToks where he's asking teenage girls if they want to die and then leapfrogging random...
It's just a prank, bro.
Yeah, just assaulting and leapfrogging random Orthodox Jewish men in the street.
He was just a nuisance, wasn't he?
Yeah, then Piers Morgan invited him on because, of course, he wanted clickbait. And he boasted about British law being too permissive. And then when asked about his relationship with his family, he said, I'm estranged from my mum. Of course, no mention of a relationship with his father. Color me shocked. He was rearrested for then breaching a court order because he was ordered not to enter London and not to upload anything on TikTok. And then he said, oh, mate, my friend got into my account with my password and uploaded a video of me doing another prank, even though I was ordered not to do the pranks, which just shows that he can't claim any responsibility. He's just entirely solipsistic. And as of time of reporting, a couple of days ago, he was jailed in a youth detention facility to about 18 months. I mean, light touch, bit frustrating, but at least he's off the streets for a little bit before he encourages, I don't know, a bunch of people to go raid Oxford Street or something next time. And then the last one, speaking of people that probably should face some more repercussions, the Philip Schofield drama. Now, I'm not alleging anything here, but people did raise a few eyebrows when Philip Schofield came out of the closet because it seemed a bit precursive. And it turns out that he was having an illicit affair with an 18-year-old showrunner who he might have met between the ages of 10 to 15 at a local theatre company, and who he followed on Twitter, age 15, behind his wife's back, which he probably left his wife and children for. And then it also turns out that his brother is a convicted paedophile.
It's very strange, isn't it?
Yeah, quite uncomfortable. When all this came out, he then went into total meltdown and said that he's feeling suicidal because the media were looking at him. And then later on in the year as well, we had a BBC News presenter called Hugh Edwards who did a similar thing of where he was sexting some teenage guy, even though he was married to a woman. And then he also said that he had a mental health episode, so the media shouldn't look into it too much. Now,
Convenient, isn't it?
yeah.
Funny how those turn up.
It would almost sound like there is an institutional culture of abuse of young boys within the English media establishment.
Yeah, I've never heard of that happening before. I mean, I will say I had heard about this story before it had broken because I knew someone who was friends with a boy who had worked at ITV and said that this sort of thing had happened. But of course, you don't get to say anything until the person that it's happened to comes out and says it themselves. But Schofield is far from the first person in British media to have a sex scandal. I can assure you he's probably far from the last. And that's why that whole place is just a sordid place. But fortunately, we don't do that at Lotus Eaters. So that was all the Lotus Eaters coverage for May. Thanks for sticking with and supporting us.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com and check out the merch store, in which you can find things such as the They Are Lying mugs. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.